the recording. And right, so welcome and welcome to this session. Allow me to introduce Dr. Dylan Williams from Queen Mary University of London. He is going to tell us something about students' agency and, well, its relationship in the context of the internationalization of higher education. So, Dr. Williams, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you for the introduction. My talk today is basically titled Problematizing Student Agency in the Internationalization of Higher Education. And the central argument of the paper is that unjust neoliberal language policies are constraining student agency. So due to time restrictions, I'm going to focus on these areas. And all of this is building to the theory which emerged from my study, which is labeled situated linguistic capital theory, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And on this slide, I provide an overview of the background to internationalization in South Korea. So in 1996, when South Korea joined the OECD, this opened the doors for universities to pursue internationalization. And also the momentum of English language use in higher education visibly increased after the millennium through government established university support programs to increase the international student population, such as the 2004 Study Korea project. And following the introduction of the project, EMI courses offered by South Korean universities swiftly rose. And so did the international student population, which is actually projected to reach 200,000 this year. And on this slide as well, we see the motivators for the pursuit of internationalization in South Korea. And just to comment on one of them, attracting international students to South Korea is a means of survival for some South Korean universities as the birth rate is declining. And this slide provides an overview of the current state of English education in South Korea. So students learn English in state education from third grade elementary school when they're aged between 8 to 9 years old. And the CSAT exam, which is the university entrance exam, in the case of English, this focuses on testing students' receptive skills. And this also changed from a relative to an absolute grading scale in 2017. And part of the reason for this change was to put less pressure on students having to study English in expensive cram schools, and also to reduce their anxiety concerning their English results. But this means that students are now entering university with a lower English proficiency as they focus less on studying English for the CSAT. And EMI currently averages 20% of the courses at 10 of the leading universities in the Seoul area. And over the last decade, this actually reflects a downward trajectory, partly spurred by changes in government funding policies and ranking criteria, and also is reflective of the fact that stakeholders' linguistic challenges are not being adequately supported. So there's a wide critique of the CSAT exam and higher education EMI as being dominant policy paths in South Korea. And the English language is perceived as having a neoliberal ideology, having significant linguistic capital in the EFL context. For example, on the last point here, we can see that South Koreans spend a whopping $15.8 billion annually on English private education. So my aim in this paper is to understand if South Korean university students have the opportunity to shape their English education environment. In order to do this, I first conceptualize context and agency for the purpose of this study. And the left-hand figure is a simple representation of how the educational system operates in a hierarchy. So consequently, students are given predetermined action possibilities, which are set in advance by the operating past constraints within the upper systems of the environment, and not by the present classroom agents. So therefore, if students are acting on predetermined action possibilities, their acting potential is being shaped by the constraints instead of them shaping it. And agency for the purposes of my study is understood as the freedom to act independently. So if we consider the interplay of student agency and the context they are situated in, represented by this right-hand figure, we could say that agency can be shaped by context, context can be shaped by agency, and therefore both can together constitute a positive dynamic for growth and development, and therefore some type of imbalance between them may constrain growth and development. So my understanding of agency and context for the purposes of my research was further informed by Giddens and Bourdieu's work. In Giddens' structuration theory, agency and power exist in a duality of structure, whereby rules and resources influence action. So therefore, agents are bounded within the structure, and therefore they act according to their knowledge of it by remaking what is already made. And in Bourdieu's notion of habitus, agents' actions are determined by the interplay of habitus, which is the agent's past subjective experiences, and field, which we can understand as the wider world in which agents are situated. So in this field, positions of power are determined by the distribution of capital, such as symbolic capital to do with prestige and credibility, economic capital to do with material wealth, cultural capital to do with skills derived from the culture, and linguistic capital to do with language resources available to an agent and the values that an agent will connect to each resource. So therefore, linguistic proficiency is the product of skills and resources accumulated over an agent's lifetime. And capital is value associated with the skills and resources. So to Bourdieu, therefore, language is more than a natural means of communication. It's also an instrument of power which determines and is determined by an agent's position in society. So my research was guided by the following research questions. Question 1, how students' past schooling experiences affect their EMI experiences. And the second question, how students' agency affects their EMI experiences. And then the other bullets provide an overview of my research design. I focused on recruiting engineering and business students as these majors had the greatest visibility of EMI courses compared to the other majors at the university where I conducted my research. And I also used the constructivist grounded theory and the constant comparison approach to analyze my research, which led to the emergence of a grounded theory. So as I previously mentioned, I've labeled this grounded theory as situated linguistic capital situated linguistic capital theory. And the theory conceptualizes how L1 and L2 linguistic codes present linguistic capital in different situations. So these situations refer to particular experiences or interactions or points of accessing subject content that the students find themselves in, where a degree of trust in a linguistic code is formed or affected. So therefore, linguistic capital is formed by past experiences and has the potential to affect future access to subject content. So therefore, within the theory, situated linguistic capital is conceptualized as a construct within an ecology that a degree of trust creates and from which affordances flow. And what I discovered in my research is that in the case of South Korean students, their past experiences constrain their ability to develop adequate linguistic capital in EMI situations, which I'll exemplify with some data excerpts on the next few slides. So on the CSAT path, the lack of exposure to productive skills has been a constraint or is a constraint for the students when they enter university, because some students lack confidence in using these skills when they enter university, as exemplified by the extract here. And in this case, the student's lack of confidence in his linguistic capital prevents him from accessing and questioning the subject content, presenting him with unjust access to his EMI education. And also it emerged from the data that receptive skills dominate EMI content delivery in lectures in South Korea. However, productive skills are in great demand when students apply for positions with multinational companies, as expressed in this extract. So hired students are expected to have excellent abilities in all 4 skills, and the interviews are conducted in English as well. So a lack of readiness for this expectation is perceived to be a constraint by the student, as we can see here. And this also exemplifies how situated linguistic capital, shaped by past experiences, constrain students as they provide less affordances to them and consequently are trusted less. So Scarantino makes a distinction between happening and goal affordances, which we can see defined on this slide. And happening affordances appear to mostly describe the affordance constructs that have been identified in my study, in that the students of the study, they are passive rather than active agents, as their quest to enhance their linguistic capital is being shaped by the prevailing constraints within the broader structure of the cultural environment. So even in the case of goal affordances, it is the prevailing constraints of the culture which pushes parents of students to find alternative education abroad. So in this sense, they are shaping themselves within the structure of the situated cultural context that is ultimately shaping them. And the extract on this slide helps to exemplify a happening affordance. The students' CSAT focus on receptive skills limited his acting potential in this case. So he was placed on a predetermined path where an affordance constrained his potential to act. Even though he acknowledges his lack of proficiency in productive skills, he disregards productive skills as being necessary at this time for his future, at the time of his high school education, that is. And even though he reflected negatively on his high school experience, his future was being determined by his CSAT score rather than his ability to speak or write in English. And this illustrates how the test-oriented approach presents students with happening affordances. In other words, the student, like other South Korean students taking the CSAT, was being limited in his acting potential as he was acting spontaneously within the constraints of the ecological structure. So to conclude, the question therefore is, can students break free from their habitus formed within their social structure? In other words, can they break free from the past experiences of passive agency? Students are constrained in their English learning as they're bound by top-down dominant policy path structures, which results in injustice, as they are detached from the reality of stakeholders. So therefore, policymakers need to implement measures that maximizes opportunities for students and other stakeholders to co-imagine socially just pedagogies within their structured ecologies. And students need to be given the opportunity to analyze existing power relations, which may help transform the dominant policy paths. And this opportunity would enable them to expose the constraints of the current system and play a role in remaking what is already made. And I believe the way to begin this process would be through an extensive needs analysis conducted with key stakeholders, in turn opening the door for bottom-up directions in future policies, which I suggest as a direction for future research. So this is the end of my talk, and here are my references, and thank you for listening, and also feel free to contact me if you have any further questions, and I'll hand the floor back to Paolo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. It was an incredibly interesting presentation. My supervisor is actually very experienced in the South Korean context. He had been working there for quite a long time. I would like to ask the chat if there are any questions right now, because we might have time for just one question. If not, I am going to ask one. Nobody? Um, uh, so thank you, Dr. Williams. One thing that that really impressed me from your presentation, could you go back to the slides, to slide number 12? The one, yes, the one with the interview. And quite rightly, I could see some of the issues emerging from this particular setting, like, for example, the mentioning of the assessment, how it has this washback effect as well in the way teaching is done. This focus on, for example, receptive skills, which is not focused on, which it doesn't allow them to do any output. But I also see some things like some psychological elements, like when the student is talking about, when I faced with foreign people, it was very hard for me to take conversation with them. Do you think that perhaps, and this is something that might connect this research to global Englishes as well, do you think that is perhaps also, the way English is presented to the students, like when they meet with this foreign person, they think, he's the owner of a language, he's the judge, and I'm afraid because of that. Do you think that this could be, this is happening here? Is this what is happening, and could this be addressed?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Thank you for that question, Paolo. There is definitely, I believe, that kind of injustice that might prevent the students from actually approaching a foreign instructor, what we might refer to as a type of testimonial injustice. In other words, because the instructor is perceived to be foreigner or actually is from a different culture, then the students, not necessarily because of the language, just because of cultural differences, etc., might not necessarily know how to interact between the cultures. So it's a combination, I would say, of both the languages and also of the cultural differences. And this relates to the work of Miranda Fricker on epistemic injustices. And if you would like to read more about this, and that very last reference there, this is a paper I co-authored with my PhD supervisor, and in that paper we talk about Fricker's work around epistemic injustice, and we explore what you just mentioned about testimonial injustice as well.
I see. Thank you very much. We do have one question in the chat from Alicia, but Alicia, I'm going to take note of this question and I'm going to make it available for Dr. Williams later on, and it will get answered. But right now, I think we are all going to join a different breakout room. So whenever you're ready, you can just leave and go to a different session. Thank you so much for participating, all of you.
Thank you.